La voz que me suena es otra voz, lo que vi. Y es otro aquel lugar donde nací. Allá por el aroma se van perdiendo los sueños. Allá lejos y jamás parece que llegaremos. Guanacaste ya no está, ya no me lo canta el viento. Es que tengo que buscar más al norte, más al norte del recuerdo. La Diana que aquel día despertó, las putas viejas de la terminal. Años después tus ojos, tu color, una historia que no aprendí a contar. Y vi la pampa árida temblar. Oí el ronco quijongo y la ceniza, sudando guaro estúpido y brutal.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador. Can you hear me? Mr. Ambassador, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you perfectly, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you for the invitation to this webinar. It's a real pleasure also to be with your staff and your person and the Ankara University, which is a very close alma mater in which we have been working the past almost 2 years, and then with very good results. Thank you again for this invitation. I think the perspective of Costa Rica will be very useful for everyone. And,
thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you. I would like to thank Mr. Ambassador on behalf of Ankara University. We have the Ambassador of Costa Rica today, accredited in Ankara. His name is His Excellency Gustavo Alonso Campos Fallas. Other than Ambassador, he's a great friend of Turkey. He's a great friend of Ankara University. So it's a real honor for us. It's a privilege for us having his participation in our international webinar series. And if you allow me, Mr. Ambassador, I would like to start with the first question. The first question I would like to ask is about you and your mission in Turkey. Could you please be so kind to introduce yourself to the participants of our webinar, worldwide participants, and say a few words about your feelings on your mission in Turkey. But please do not forget to mention your special tie to Turkey and to the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you so much for that question. It's a question that allowed me to refer the special care and the special feelings I have to Turkey for many, many years. Since I arrived to Turkey, I feel like I'm home, not only because our countries have a lot of important similarities, such as the warmth and a welcoming people, and being both of our society are strongly family-oriented, but also because in the year 2000, 20 years ago, I came to Turkey for I can say three very significant purposes and very meaningful surprises. The first was to participate as a first Latin American student, as a first Costa Rican diplomat student to to be part of the 90th edition of the training course for young diplomats organized by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Turkey. This course was a very great experience to introduce me to Turkey, and not only as a professional, but also in a human level. I had my first really close encounter with Turkey and its culture. Once I finished the course, which was very intensive, I was assigned as ambassador in a special mission to carry out the study process of the potential of the bilateral relationship in view of the possible opening of the embassies of Costa Rica in Turkey, and also Turkey in Costa Rica. We are talking about 20 years ago as well. As part of this mission, I completed a very intensive agenda of meetings with different relevant actors of a very diverse numbers of sectors in order to assess the feasibility of opening an embassy of Costa Rica and Turkey at that time. We have meetings with the Chamber of Commerce, the many ministers of tourism, cooperation, and many others. And also I visited some entrepreneurs who were at that time very interested in Costa Rica as well. Turkey were also interested in doing the same type of facility study in Costa Rica, as I mentioned. And for that reason, appointed a diplomat, His Excellency Erkan Aytun, who is the current ambassador of Turkey in Guatemala. At that time, his mission to Costa Rica was not possible, but years after, I met him coincidentally in Buenos Aires, both as a diplomat and in Argentina. So we become very good friends, and we're still friends so far. And I have contact with Ambassador Aytun from time to time. At that time, the reciprocal opening of the embassy was not possible, since some different events occurred in Turkey, but also in Costa Rica. So we decided to postpone the opening of the embassy, and that took many years. But finally, we found the way to get that compromise and execute the agreement we had since 20 years ago. And it's a very special occasion for me as well, because at that time also, I was, meanwhile I was here, the organizers of all this visiting that I share with Turkey. It happens that I had married 6 weeks before to my trip to Turkey. So we took the opportunity to organize my honeymoon in Antalya, and that's why I have a very special feelings for that beautiful and a special place, which reminds me also the beaches of Costa Rica in some way. And we would say that the Turkish and Costa Rican people have something in common, which is we have a kind of warm blood, because we have sun and beaches as well. So when I was appointed ambassador of Costa Rica and Turkey, I felt honored and very happy. From the personal point of view, to be selected as a servant of my country, of which I have the best memories so far, and also from the professional point of view, this opportunity to serve my country is so important in the international community, because Turkey is a global player and a regional power. It's a country with great place to learn, and the experience as a diplomat is something to take into account seriously. So I'm very glad to return now. I was also sharing my experience with the young diplomats in the Diplomat Academy last year, because I came as a, let's say, as a young diplomat student, and I returned as ambassador, which is a big privilege that all the ambassadors had in their life. About my mission here in Turkey, in general terms, was a part of the usual work as a diplomat, which is to represent my country and its interests. My mission in Turkey is to increase the mutual knowledge between the different sectors of our countries as a basis for the development and mutual trust, which is absolutely necessary for the further development of the bilateral ties in all areas. My mission is to generate a solid base because, as I mentioned, our embassy here is quite young. So we need to strengthen from the fundamentals our bilateral relation, but also with a vision toward the future for the development of all aspects of the bilateral relationships. We are so far in the process of consolidation, both embassies and bilateral relationship as well. This process, which although so far it has been substantial and successful and has generated a prolific agenda. Taking account that we are a small embassy, which sometimes is not easy and can generate some difficulties for a broader agenda. So far, even though we are very committed and to be active, proactive, and to accomplish a main objective, which is the strengthening of the bilateral relations between both countries. We have been able to advance in some areas more than others, which is natural. But our aspiration is to make an important development in all possible areas of the bilateral relation and the political side. And we were confident that we will improve the already excellent political relations between our countries and at the highest level as possible. In the economic sector, by increasing bilateral trade, investment, and tourism. And we also seek to increase the bilateral cooperation, in particular in science and technology sectors. And in relation to the compact of climate change, which is very important to Costa Rica as one of the main actors in that regard, by increasing the contacts in academic and research cooperation and exchanges between the universities in our countries. We aspire to increase the cultural knowledge between our countries. And well, I can add an essential task is to improve also the reciprocal knowledge between our people, as a culturally speaking, because there are some misconceptions from both parties related what Turkey is as a cultural community and also for Costa Rica. Sometimes some have known the real approach for what Costa Rica is doing. Mostly, sometimes they consider us only an agriculture country, which Costa Rica have left behind. Is still an agriculture country, but we have open broad possibilities into services in technology and international markets. Our embassy was opened in October 2014, 5 years ago, and in 2014, happily, both of our governments executed reciprocally and opening the embassies in both countries. Even though diplomatic relations were established in 1950, actually we are very joyful and that we are celebrating during this year, 2020, the 70th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations. Although our countries have been officially friends for a long time, and reciprocal opening our embassies became a new starting point in this development in our bilateral relations, identifying complementarities in the area of joint works, and much easier when you have diplomats on the ground. So the opening of both embassies have been a very important starting point in which we will consolidate celebrating our anniversary this year.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Well, you mentioned the efforts to increase the mutual knowledge. I would like to thank you for your contributions in the academic field, because thanks to your efforts, thanks to your efforts, we have been able to sign some agreements, not one, but a couple of agreements with important institutions. And we are going to develop our academic cooperation with Costa Rica. And you also mentioned misconceptions and the lack of knowledge, which is so actually. When you say
Sí, porque
Turkey,
la idea, lo que él me decía.
when you say Turkey in Latin America, when you go there and you're given a conference, you see in the eyes of the people that they're not being able to imagine what really Turkey is. So we usually start out explaining where Turkey is, how does Turkey look, how the Turks live, and etc. So we have misconceptions and lack of knowledge in both ways. So my second question is going to be about knowledge about your country, Mr. Ambassador. You're coming from a country which is at the 12th place in the ranking of world happiness, all the world, and you're in the ranking of 12th country. And first in Latin America and the Caribbean. Besides, according to the VDAM Democracy Index of 2020, this year, Costa Rica ranks 8th in the world, and again, first in Latin America. Would you please tell us about these indicators and about the life of your country?
Thank you so much for this question, because it's something that Costa Rica is very proud of. The fact that Costa Rica has been ranking very high in both happiness and democracy is because there is actually a connection between those concepts, happiness and democracy. Costa Rica has been able to develop an holistic policies that promote democratic, sustainable, and inclusive economic growth. Happiness is a very difficult sometimes to imagine how the country can be happiest country in the world, but it's important to relate that concept and what the reality Costa Rica had. The case of Costa Rica is very particular. What can I say? I'm happy, we are happy, jokes aside, the question of why Costa Rica has been in the top places among the happiness index, since this sort of indicators started could be understood as a mix of elements, depending on the happiness index, because there are different happiness index to evaluate the countries. We talk, and for instance, Costa Rica has ranked first in the world for several years in a row, for example, in the Happy Planet Index. This index is calculated by the New Economic Foundation. This index in particular is focused on measuring four main aspects, mainly ecological footprint, well-being of the people, and life expectancy and inequality. Regarding the environmental and ecological preservations, several authors have said that our countryside, we are surrounded by some of the most beautiful and biodiverse landscapes in the world. That definitely helps to feel happy. And we aim to keep that way. Costa Rica has an ecological footprint, 1/4 that of the average person of some developed countries. In the decade of the 70s, for instance, we were experiencing a rapid deforestation of our pristine rainforest due to the logging, agriculture, and cattle industry. So we realized that it was not sustainable as we, as a country, began converting the 27.7% of our territory into the national parks and protected zones. Plus, we prohibited the export of certain types of trees. That measure was very important because converting the 27% of our territory was definitely a key element to develop other policies in the future, as ecotourism, for instance. Even so, by 1987, illegal logging and cattle ranching and development have reduced our country rainforest from 73 to 21% of the landscape. So that's why in 1996, Costa Rica introduced the Payment of Environmental Services Program, we call PES, and oil importers, for instance, and water bottling on sewage treatment plants now have to pay the special taxation to do business in the country, while other business contribute via voluntary carbon offset fee. The money is used to pay local people and to protect the trees and water and soil and the surroundings environment by abstaining for cattle ranching and illegal logging. Overall, because the country's new environmental policies, including the massive United Nations sponsored tree planting program, begun in 2007, more than the half of the Costa Rican territory is once again converted in rainforest. In further efforts to keep going green, the country has banned oil drilling within its borders and invests heavily in renewable energy sources like hydroelectric, wind, aeolic, and geothermal powers, which provide 99.7% of our energy. The capital, San Jose, the vehicles are permitted downtown only in certain days, depending on license plate numbers. And the government has defined a national decarbonization plan to become one of the first carbon neutral countries in the world by 2050. Plus on top of this, 20 January 2019, Costa Rica was named as United Nations Champion of the Earth for its pioneering role in fighting the climate change. The first time the United Nations Prize was awarded to a country. But preserving our tropical rainforest isn't Costa Rica only accomplishment. We also have a social care and well-being state, and not only as a social benefit, but also to support our economy. The government ensures that all citizens to have access to healthcare and education, which has two basic elements for well-being. Costa Rica has one of the highest life expectancies in the world. Let's say our Nicoya Peninsula in the province of Guanacaste is one of the world's blue zones. Blue zones are places where the inhabitants frequently live to be over 100 years old. The residents of those zones generally eat well, get plenty of exercise, have genetic predisposition to longevity, and probably the pura vida way of living contributes to this longevity. The Ministry of Health of our country promotes good health among the citizens even before they are born, sending doctors, nurses out nationwide, even to the most remote areas to provide prenatal care and teach the parents how to raise healthy children. Costa Rica is a mid-income country, and a mid-income level allows to huge majority of our citizens to satisfy their basic needs, given the fact that, as said before, thanks to a strong state, health services, education, and even in nutrition services are provided to children in the schools, focusing on the welfare of all citizens, not only in case well-being, but also increases the productivity in the country. We can add to this a complementary way to live in Costa Rica. Peace is another ingredient to have a happy country, which is very important. We would say that is a landmark of Costa Rica. For instance, I never in my life had the chance to see an armed tanks or soldiers in my country, because we live in a peaceful country, because in 1948 the army was abolished before that I was born. Not only to protect our democracy, but to invest those resources in healthcare and education, but also because we believe in peace, and peace has been a priority in our country, domestically and internationally. Peace we actively promoted around the world, and in particular diplomatic multilateral areas. Our compromise with peace was demonstrated in the 1980s, when the government of Costa Rica worked to establish with the United Nations the University for Peace, which is this university happens that have some agreements with the local Turkish university as well. And this university is a kind of cradle of research and on conflict resolutions, conflict prevention, and it's actually a peace itself. In 1987, the former President Arias, who visited the University of Ankara,
Yes.
and in particular visited the Lamet,
Exactly. We were honored with Mr. President's visit to our university.
I think it was a very good experience for the Lamet Institute. I remember that you just showed me some pictures of the president and that visit, and also I think a book was developed unveiled at that time.
Exactly.
And well, the President Arias' efforts was recognized when he was appointed, and he won actually the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts to negotiate and an agreements that brought peace in Central America during the decade of the 80s. And we can add other initiatives in which Costa Rica has been presented as a leader. Let's say the Global Alliance to Meet for Ministries and Departments of Peace was attended by 40 countries in order to work on developing peace and infrastructure and their own governments. Costa Rica is considered among the countries with a high level of peace, according to the 2020 Global Peace Index. And another ingredient about it, to add to have this sense of happiness is the social capital. In general, our citizens have enough spare time to abundant interpersonal relations. We could safely say that in general, Costa Rica are very social and friendly, and the importance of the family and friends is a social capital we protect and we are proud of. Democracy is also a result of this condition of the country. Costa Rica has a long-standing tradition of conditions, has allowed to enjoy a strong and stable democracy and institution. For example, Costa Rica, since the beginning of the Republic in 1821, Costa Rica was a very egalitarian society. Of course, the abolition of the military by former President Figueres is another historic landmark. Rule of law is essential. Rule of law and freedom. We believe that human rights, the rule of law and democracy are interlinked and mutually reinforcing. And also the separation of the two branches of the government, the executive, legislative, and judicial, guarantees the strength of our democracy. Costa Rica is also well recognized for the respect of human rights as a priority, and respect is ensured at the highest level of the constitutional court in Costa Rica. Also, we can say the Inter-American Court of Human Rights is settled in Costa Rica, recognizing the tradition that Costa Rica had developed during its history.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for your answer. I would like to underline once more that Costa Rica, you have just mentioned it actually, but Costa Rica is one of the few countries in the world that do not have an army. You don't see an army officer, you don't see soldiers in Costa Rica, and their army was abolished in 1948. and about His Excellency, former President, Mr. Oscar Arias. He was the first head of state to visit our Center for Latin American Studies in Ankara after our establishment. So it was very, very important for us. You have also mentioned the concept pura vida in your intervention. Now the question would be about that. The slogan of Costa Rica is pura vida, or pure life in English, we could say. Would you tell us, please, about the meaning and how it represents the culture of your country?
Thank you. This is an important question because, as I mentioned before, pura vida is a way of life. It's a concept that you learn about pura vida when not only to visit Costa Rica, it's when you already went to Costa Rica. Pura vida is understood only if you are believing or living or you visit Costa Rica for business or for tourism. It is like a way of life, or we call us ticos. As we Costa Rican, we know in a tender of more familiar way, use this term to say hello, to say goodbye, to say everything is great. Almost for everything, pura vida is included in our domestic vocabulary. Actually, some people try to understand what is the real meaning of pura vida, but this is very difficult to give just one denomination, and this is the term. However, it's not a word that reflect the. There is no words to reflect exactly meaning of pura vida. Pura vida could be considered as way of Costa Rica life, and is directly related for our previous questions that we are one of the happiest countries in the world. There is this idea that Costa Rica tend to have less stress in comparison with other countries because are considered to be very relaxed people, and that we have a very simple way of looking at life. Pura vida could be synonym of no worries or no fuss, or in a way that it could be compared, I understand, to the kolay gelsin in Turkey. Did I pronounce it well?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And to a lot of Costa Rica, the concept of pura vida means being thankful for what they have, and not dwelling on the negative. Regarding the origins of this expression that has become the main national slogan, we know that its use started early in the decade of 50s, more or less, since its origin is related to the importance of remaining optimistic, and even despite the unfortunate circumstances, we say, okay, pura vida is an emotion, is an attitude, is happiness, is connected with that concept. So, pura vida por la pregunta.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The fourth question is about the most important happening of this year, a disaster, actually. Could you please give us some information on the difficulties of COVID-19 pandemic in your country and the measures taken?
Well, up to date, Costa Rica has suffered in total, the last numbers I have is only 9 but tragic or sad deaths since the beginning of the pandemic. So Costa Rica,
right?
Sorry?
Nine.
Only
people
11.
have.
Only 11.
11 people.
Yes, since the beginning of the pandemic. So Costa Rica registered up to date a total of 2,515 cases, and has 1,293 active cases, which represents 0.43%. So far, the difficulties have been not so much in the health sector, unfortunately, but the main problem is the great effects that is having an economy nowadays. President Alvarado, our president of Costa Rica, has stated that COVID-19 reminds us that the threats as a climate change that is still present. And for this reason, we must persist in our national and global task for decarbonization. We are heading to a new world and a new normality, where sustainability and nature-based solutions, inclusion, and mutual care must be the norm of coexistence. Our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Excellency Rodolfo Alvarado, say that we have learned, first of all, that solidarity-based and universal social system is essential for the detection of cases and their due control and or isolation and follow-up until that the full recovery of the patients, and to avoid these threats of uncontrolled community contagion. We have learned that the health is non-negotiable, not even in a non-pandemic scenario, since it's the part of the social and economic well-being necessary for the human development. We have also learned that since scientific research is an element of national security, as well as innovation and production of sanitary materials, which have become a national priority and have also involved certain complications at the level of free trade and security production chains and international distribution of goods and services that need to be addressed regionally and internationally for the development of protocols for shared applications. We have defeated the pandemic and understand the health as a global public good. Due to the current pandemic, we should not neglect the protection of the biodiversity and fight against the climate change. Everything under the umbrella of the human rights and the respect of democratic institutions. The approach used by Costa Rica has been developed in several action plans. For instance, work on the prompt implementation of the measures internally and internationally. Secondly, accelerate the coordination to receive and provide international cooperation. Activate our consular network to repatriate Costa Rican citizens abroad, all over the world. Another point important is at the multilateralism level, Costa Rica has been proactive in presenting proposals to confront the pandemic, such as the one related with the creation in the World Health Organizations of a COVID-19 rights repository of COVID-19 technological acts pool, which was launched on May 29 this year in Geneva. Costa Rica also presented before multilateral financial organizations a proposal to access exceptional financial terms related to interest rates, grace period, and longer repayments terms with an interest rate zero, as low as possible, as well as exemption from payments of commissions and charges. We invite the international community to join us in these two important initiatives. Costa Rica has faced to this day proactively and preventively since the health perspective the effects of the pandemic on this territory and encourage resolve on how to approach the phenomenon of such dimensions with relatively few human casualties. Furthermore, this is a country that is in global crisis, is showing a very good response capacity and solid institutional framework that, thanks to the robust health system, of course, we are being prudent and cautious. And we have to take in account the fragility of our, let's say, success, and have to keep in mind the need to continue respecting the measures adopted by the competent authorities. This pandemic phenomena is very difficult to forecast and to control. That's why maybe we have been, let's say, successful in this regard, but we have to be careful about it. And,
exactly.
We have to keep the measures dictated by the competent authorities, as I mentioned. According to some analysis, this good management of the health crisis could be related to the universality to access of health in Costa Rica, and also education system, coupled by this preventing policies on social level as well. The measure adopted at the national level have been based on technical and scientific criteria, putting the most vulnerable population first, and in accordance with the mandate of the human rights and democratic institutions. Also, Costa Rica is committed to find multilateral solidarity and innovative solutions for the pandemic, since only united, only all together, we can give the answer required by this published situation. We rely on the human talent to create the knowledge, and allows us to accelerate the scientific developments necessary to protect the health and our population, and put the discoveries and innovation that are generated at the service of the whole humankind. The only way we can ensure the reconstruction, Professor, and well-being in our society is guaranteeing the access for all the countries, the most vulnerable populations, to the technological developments. For economics situations, some measures have been taken. The government is providing the 3 months temporary financial aid to people affected by the COVID health emergency. Those persons that were fired or had their employment contract suspended, independent informal workers, if the application is approved, are receiving an economic aid of approximately $260 per month. Also, our Institute for Water adopted measures to guarantee that all families all over the country will have access to clean and potable water during the pandemic, even if they are not able to pay it. As part of the government's response to the COVID-19, a national comprehensive strategy and measures were taken for sectors of the population vulnerable in vulnerable conditions related to certain human rights groups, such as the elderly, children, adolescents, and young adults, persons with disabilities, homeless people in extreme poverty, beneficiaries of social programs, and for indigenous population.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. You mentioned a concept, fragile success, which could be an important concept to underline, because all success in these pandemic days, I understand that is fragile. All numbers may change, all the success could go away. So we all have to be very, very careful, I understand. You mentioned a bit about your healthcare system and how it responded to it, but would you like to give us some more details about how your healthcare system helped on the fight against the pandemic in terms of medications and treatments?
Well, to answer that question, I would like to, I think it's necessary to share an interesting historical issue regarding our healthcare system since 1940. The former President Calderon launched a nationwide healthcare program sponsored mainly by the state, by the creation what we call the Social Security Funds, or Caja de Seguro Social in Spanish, which derives in the establishment and a universal right to access to healthcare. This universal right to access to healthcare was later established in the Constitution for 1949 and widely developed by the jurisprudence and rulings of the Constitutional Court since 1989. It was the base additional to the already opportunity to invest in health instead to arms or weapons. What allowed us to build a robust and very modern healthcare system, which had been essentially based in order to be ready for the global health emergency like one we are now facing. I would like also to highlight three particular major developments that our scientific community for detection and medication and treatment for this virus. I can mention first the purified antibodies from plasma treatment to combat the virus, the COVID-19. The government declared public and national interest the research made by the University of Costa Rica Institute. This project aimed to develop and produce a validate and therapeutic effectiveness of two preparation of antibody against the SARS-CoV-2 virus, one of the human purified antibodies from the plasma convalescent patients, and other purified antibodies from plasma of horses immunized with proteins. These drugs will be an adoption to treat patients with the COVID-19 in the several state critical infection that does improve in clinical course. On the third week of May, if I'm not wrong, our health authorities announced that they began applying this plasma-based treatment of the people recovered from the COVID-19 to positive patients who are hospitalized. Few countries in the world have this technological capacity. The second point is the locally produced PCR test for the detection of the COVID-19. The government of Costa Rica established a task force made up of Costa Rican experts in molecular biology, physiology, virology, microbiology, genetics, biotechnology, and that create a local test for the detection of the COVID-19. This eliminated the dependence of the international market, which currently has high demand for those detection tests. And currently countries around the world are competing to acquire reagents of the laboratory kits to diagnose the virus that causes this virus disease. Faced with the scenario, the public institutions, private companies, and the United Nations have undertaken to validate alternative protocols to identify the presence of the SARS-CoV virus. Costa Rica possesses a human talent with great capabilities that work together for more and better options to overcome this pandemic. And not only in medical terms, but also in terms of scientific, social, economic development, and with solidarity and united Costa Rica is transforming the crisis in an opportunity. And United Nations have recognized Costa Rica's formidable potential on innovation and technology, and is working with the Ministry of Health, Science and Technology of Costa Rica to ensure that we can provide solutions and help the most vulnerable populations. We will try to promote the research and development assistance, ventilation devices, face shields and screen tests to support the national hospital system. We guarantee the biological safety and frontline personnel in the national hospital network. We guarantee the safety of the health patients who require to use emergency medical equipment, provide assistance and scientific design and engineering support to interested participants groups to optimize the accelerator, the design and development process of these devices. Ministry of Science and Technology is promoting 3 different special areas of work, providing resources to detection and prevention, empower the communities, national, transnational companies, and national research scientists to able to develop national prototypes, promotion of capacity building and technology, for small and medium-sized enterprises to better cope with the economic consequences of the pandemic. So this Costa Rican social security systems, which is an institution in charge of most of the national public health sector, converted a former hospital in a record time into a hospital exclusive for patients affected with COVID-19. And Social Security Fund also established a series of alliances with public and private companies to facilitate the delivery of the medicines to homes, to the people, especially those with the health risk factor. They do not have to out of their houses to expose themselves to the virus. So it's a chain of initiatives that we are achieving to try to keep as low as possible the contagion of this virus.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for the information you have just provided. Could you please point out some specific sectors other than the health sector, naturally, and the education sector that was affected worldwide, but such as tourism, agriculture, which are quite important for your country, and how these sectors were affected during the pandemic?
Well, Costa Rica, as the rest of the world, is working to solve the puzzle of how to deal with this pandemic while it's seeking alternatives to revive our economy. In this dilemma, our government had tried to be as balanced as possible, but prioritizing the health part of the equation, of course. There are several sectors that have been impacted by the pandemic. It is really unfortunate since the economy of Costa Rica has been very stable for the last 40 years. But for the last 2 years, with a very low inflation. Our country has evolved from an economy that once depended mostly on agriculture 40 years ago, as I mentioned, to one of that nowadays is the most diverse. Sectors such as tourism, high-tech, medical devices, medical components, electronics, IT services are now the main sectors of our economy. Currently, our GDP is generated 76% by the service sector. So we are no more an agricultural only economy-based country, where we have diversified our international national offer to international markets. In order to help the industrial sector, the 50% tariff reduction was established of the electricity service for the commercial and industrial users for 3 months during this pandemic. Being Costa Rica such a touristic country, as Turkey also is, well, saving the measures, of course, because we are a small country. Of course, the pandemic has caused tremendous damage in our economy. In 2019, Costa Rica received 3,200,000 visitors. But you have to take into account that the country only has 5.5 million inhabitants. So we have more than half of the populations as a tourism.
Tourism so more than half of your population every year visit your country as tourists.
Yes. Tourism is a strategic axis of our country's economy, and one of the 3 bases of our country brand. By 2017, tourism constitutes 7% of the country GDP, with a steady growth since 2011. The importance of tourism activities lies not only in the direct employment that it generates, but also in a whole series of productive chains and services throughout the country. It is worth mentioning that 94% of the lodging companies which a tourist declaration are made up of small and medium-sized companies, 94%. This means that the big majority of the accommodation sector of the country is run by families' businesses. The current pandemic is being a period of zero income for this sector, for these families, and that is the complete stoppage of the chain of services linked to the tourism, such as the mandatory closure of lodgings, tourist transport, and activities aimed at tourists. We have been suffering a lot. the cancellation of hotel reservation, the prohibition of international arrivals, flights, and mandatory closure of the main tourist destination in Costa Rica, such beaches and protected wild areas, caused a contraction in the local economies. According with some data from the Ministry of Tourism in Costa Rica and the Ministry of Labor, as April 15, 25,085 direct workers in the sector had seen their income affected due to the layoff and temporary suspensions of contracts, reduction in the working hours. And this data do not include complementary services and products. They are being produced through the chains of services by informal workers linked to the tourism. The estimations are being made about the duration of this situation by the two main organizations, the Institute Costa Rican Tourism and the Chamber of Tourism. And they try to evaluate the crisis. And still, they forecast that probably the crisis will last several months. The 3 months zero income that the sector and the later 12 months of the slow recovery, depending on the international context of the evolution of the pandemic. These estimations are in the best scenarios, although in the tourism ministry calculations estimate that the losses of Costa Rica economy for the month of April alone will be $380 million approximately. If the trend continues, the gap caused by the crisis will be very deep, and the sector's recovery may take even longer. We hope not. Foreseeing the macroeconomic effects on the Costa Rican economy due to the pandemic, we can mention as it will be all over the world, the reduction of the overall growth. Our economy has been very stable, as I mentioned, the last 40 years, but we will be affected for this world reduction in the overall growth. In response to a drop in growth, companies will decrease their employment roles. There is an expectation that the Costa Rica economy will begin to regain jobs in the country, and the rest of the world recovers during the third or fourth quarters of this year. A low rate of inflation in Costa Rica economy is projected to be a lower level of inflation in 2020. So this expectations are not too tragic and help us to keep our hope. But there are many other implications expected because this pandemic, consumer confidence has been reduced, decline of the demand for credit. There are many other Costa Rican foreign trade companies report slow shipment and landing ports in some places like in Asia. But we firmly believe the measure taken by the government and also the civil society taking care for them and trying to recover and keep the social distance and follow all the instructions from the government will give us a better future.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. You mentioned a possible recovery towards the end of the year, which would be very, very good for us too, because after all, we are a touristic country too. We were approaching 40 million tourists, which is equal to half of our population too. So a quick recovery would be good for our economy too, definitely. So the next question would be about the cooperation between our two countries. What is the trade volume between our countries? What do we buy from Costa Rica? What do we sell? What do we export to Costa Rica? And how the exports and imports were affected during this pandemic period?
Well, as I mentioned before, we are in the process to consolidate many of our agenda with Turkey between both countries. And we have to, of course, work in a commercial and trade and also investment and tourism interest. Due to the distance that we have, because we are in Central America, and the distance is a special factor that affects the logistics prices, and especially the products we are complementary in the economy with Turkey, like agriculture or of tropical fruits, for instance. The fruits you cannot find here in the local markets. It's a task we are working very hard. I will mention some important achievements that working not only my embassy or the Costa Rican embassy here in Turkey, but also the Turkish embassy in San Jose. The commercial exchange between our countries is one of the major areas of opportunity for development in our bilateral relations. Then, the total of our bilateral trade is approximately $150 million for 2019. Year to year, it has been fluctuating. The trend is slow but positive. I must accept it has been predominantly positive for Turkey side in terms of the evident growth of export from Turkey to Costa Rica. The main products sold by Costa Rica to Turkey are, as I mentioned, the tropical fruits, especially fresh, but also dried, and particular bananas and pineapples. From Turkey to Costa Rica, the main products we import are metal, especially iron and steel. For this year, it will be expectable that it might be a decline for bilateral trade for obvious reasons, as the World Trade Organization already states as a plunge for this year, being the fact that the international trade was already negative trend since 2019, likely due to the trade wars and also for the pandemic affectation. The data available until May seems to show that there are not been a major decrease in our bilateral trade, but due to historical fluctuations trends, it is difficult to determine the actual effect of the pandemic. Of course, that there is disruption, delays, and decrease of the volumes that international trade is experiencing would also have an impact in our bilateral trade in a context where, to be honest, even before in the pre-pandemic time, the logistics for the import and export of goods to and from other countries was already a major area of opportunity for improvement. A particularly important development for the future development of economic relations between our countries is the entry in force 2 weeks ago of the Memorandum of Understanding for the establishment of the Joint Committee on Commerce between Costa Rica and Turkey. We are very pleased to announce it. And this MOU set up a framework for the work, and from now on, a more structured basic between the Ministries of Trade between two countries and other relevant institutions towards increase the bilateral commerce and investment. So it's a good news. It's something that give us more expectation. It can help us to support in the bilateral economies and bilateral trade system.
Thank you for that information, Mr. Ambassador. And coming to the end, the last question is about cooperation again. What were the possibilities of cooperation during the pandemic, and what will be the cooperation of our two countries during, now and after the pandemic period, afterwards and now? What and how do we collaborate, or we have done, and what is to be done in the future?
I'm glad you asked me this question because it allows me to explain several very important aspects of Costa Rican policy towards international cooperation. And the case of Costa Rica is very particular regarding international cooperation. We are a country with a dual role. That is to say, we are receivers of international cooperation, but at the time we are offerers and providers of cooperation as well. We still need the cooperation of friendly countries in several areas in order to help us to achieve our development. It is true that in cooperation with the rest of the countries in our area, we enjoyed a good high level of quality of life indicators. But that does not mean that we still do not need cooperation in a range of different areas. We have to take into account that Costa Rica recently, the last month, was accepted as a member as OECD, as Turkey is, and the most consolidated and solid economies. And we are happy for that. But there are many things we have to work to keep that level. Precisely due to the progress achieved by our country in the early 90s, Costa Rica was excluded from the access to receive official development assistance and most of the other ways as sources of cooperation. This decision was made due to the use of one of the particular criteria, the GDP per capita. Just by using the single indicator, the country was since then barred of the cooperation programs of the main international donors. In a way, this is like punishing success. That is to say, to punish a country like Costa Rica. Yes. Yeah, it's like they're punishing Costa Rica that previously used the cooperation received and the efficient in an appropriate way in doing the right way to use that cooperation. Costa Rica continues to have a strong leadership between middle-income countries in order to push for the considerations of that said simple-minded criteria for international cooperation. Costa Rica has a strong position on the matter international arena, and not only has criticized the said simplistic standard, we have also proposed options to improve those benchmarks. The main of this proposal is to call structural gaps, which means that donors should not only consider the GDP per capita and look into a wider group indicators and national conditions in order to determine the beneficiaries of the cooperation. Those structural gaps should be looked up at the following areas: poverty and inequity, infrastructure, education, gender, productivity, and innovation. As I mentioned before, Costa Rica is also an offerer of international cooperation. We have achieved important developments in a wide range of areas, and we have acquired significant levels of technical advance that allow us to be able to provide technical cooperation to some other countries. So might not be able to provide financial-based cooperation, but we have the capacity to provide technical assistance. This position has also allowed us to join forces with some other countries that have the financial needs, traditional major international donors, in order to create a triangular cooperation project with a third country as a beneficiary. So within this scheme, we provide technical assistance. One country provides the financial, and the third country benefits from both kinds of cooperation. We look forward to having Turkey as a partner for triangular cooperation, and we are working on this aspect. And we're currently willing to start talks in order to establish projects for sharing the best practices, not only in relation to the attention of this pandemic, but also in the future in several other topics such as renewable energies, climate change, sustainable tourism, which is very important. And it is especially important to remark that the pandemic has made us realize the importance of the further development of cooperation in health sector, which has been traditionally abandoned or not always been the center in comparison with other areas of cooperation. So this is an area where we will also start to work to identify possible areas or work between both our health care systems that would be mutually beneficial for the sake of the improvement on the performance of our countries. Cooperation in the health sector is fundamental up to date, not only bilateral, but also in multilateral fora. And that is why Costa Rica proposed to the Director General of the World Health Organizations the COVID-19 Rights Repository, also known as a COVID-19 Technology Access Pool, that I mentioned before. And this platform would allow to sharing of data, knowledge, intellectual property, and facilitate equitable access to health products, and we would save lives against the COVID-19. So far, 39 countries have already co-sponsored and endorsed this Costa Rican proposal for the health of all inhabitants in the world. So we call all the countries to join us in this global and important initiative.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. It was a great honor for us to have you here. Thank you once more for participating in our webinar and for all that information that you have provided.
Dr. Kutlu, the pleasure is all mine, and I've been honored to being invited to the Ankara University and your Latin American Studies Institute. And we hope we keep working together in many of the aspects we are mentioning in this webinar regarding the plans we know we can share in the different areas the University of Ankara have developed, and very important ones for Costa Rica. And also Costa Rica also can provide, we have discussion many times and my visits to Ankara University. And I hope and I'm completely sure we will keep working together. Thank you again for this, the time you gave us to explain some particular point of view about Costa Rica and what Costa Rica is doing with Turkey and the rest of the world.
It was a pleasure for us, Mr. Ambassador. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.